Hello everyone, welcome to Nightmare Echo. I know most of you use this video to sleep, so relax and drift off as we begin. A popular reality TV star. A late night in Las Vegas. He claims he blacked out. But when he came to, the woman next to him was motionless. Lifeless. The carpet stained, the silence overwhelming. What happened in those missing hours? What did his mind erase, or choose to forget? Elsewhere, three friends cheered for their favorite team. They laughed, drank, took photos. By morning, they were gone. No one thought to look in the backyard, until it was too late. The cold had taken them, but something in the toxicology report didn't make sense. And the man who was supposed to be their friend? He says he didn't hear a thing. In a quiet California neighborhood, a mother's voice cracked as she told reporters her daughter had been taken. Beaten, branded, chained. The entire nation believed her. But the truth was stranger than anyone imagined. Because the kidnapping wasn't real. And the bruises weren't what they seemed. These aren't just stories. They are real lives. Real deaths. And moments that still raise more questions than they answer. Close your eyes if you want. You can try to sleep. But you might find your mind wide awake. Listening. Because tonight, we're walking through the true stories that were never supposed to happen. The ones that begin with an ordinary day. And end with a name in a headline. A face on a missing poster. Or a family holding a photo and wondering. What could we have done differently? Tonight, as the rain keeps you company, we begin our journey. Get comfortable. Stay close. And listen closely. Because what you're about to hear really happened. And some parts still don't have answers. Story 1. Akshaya Kubiak was no stranger to attention. He knew the camera angles that flattered him best. He could read a room like a script, and play to it like a role he was born to perform. Viewers of Las Vegas gigolos knew him as confident. Charming. Magnetic. The kind of man who never seemed out of control. Until the night he was. It started like so many nights in the city that never sleeps. Neon lights humming over a crowded strip. Music pulsing from rooftops, cars weaving in and out of traffic like dancers in an unpredictable rhythm. Inside one of the clubs, the energy was thick. VIP booths crowded with glittering drinks and louder conversations. Cameras weren't filming that night, but it wouldn't matter. What happened would be replayed again and again, in police interviews, courtroom testimonies, and forensic timelines. He met her there. She was 31. Warm smile. Curious eyes. To friends, she was thoughtful. Independent. Kind. To him, she was a stranger. Until they weren't. They left together. Sometime after midnight. According to club staff, they looked happy. Comfortable. There was laughter. A kiss. No one could have guessed what would happen less than an hour later. The apartment was quiet. A high-rise suite with thick curtains and too many mirrors. Inside, the lights were low. A few glasses. An open bag. What was in it, no one would say for sure at first. But it didn't take long for investigators to start connecting dots. Neighbors reported a loud thud. Then a brief silence. Then, one scream. Sharp. Short. And then, nothing. What happened in that apartment over the next several minutes remains partially unknown. Even Kubiak claimed not to remember. When officers arrived, the door was unlocked. He stood barefoot. Shirtless. Covered in bruises that didn't belong to him. She was found lying face down near the edge of the carpet. Her body still. Blood dried along the baseboard. A broken lamp beside her, cord twisted. Medical responders were called, but there was nothing they could do. Kubiak said he had no memory. Said he blacked out. Said he woke up and found her like that. Told officers he couldn't make sense of it. But the medical report could. The injuries were consistent. Multiple points of impact. A blunt object. Possibly more than one. Her jaw was fractured. The kind of fracture that requires force. A lot of it. Toxicology came next. In her system, traces of cocaine, alcohol, a sedative. In his, the same cocktail, plus something else. A stimulant. One that can amplify aggression. The dosage? High enough to cause confusion, paranoia, even rage. But drugs alone don't explain a crime scene like that. As investigators pulled surveillance from the building, a timeline formed. They were seen laughing at the elevator. Walking hand in hand. Less than 45 minutes later, she was dead. In interviews, he cried. Said he cared about her. Said he wanted to remember. But the evidence didn't care. Her injuries were methodical. Repeated. Not consistent with an accident. Not with a fall. Not with self-infliction. In court, the defense leaned heavily on the idea of memory loss. That he didn't know what he was doing. That he lost himself to something chemical. That it wasn't who he really was. But prosecutors showed the texts. The past incidents. The behavior patterns. The witnesses who had seen similar flashes of rage. One woman said she left him after he punched a hole in a wall inches from her head. The jury took less than a day. Guilty. Second-degree murder. Kubiak never apologized. Not publicly. And when asked if he remembered anything at all from that night, he paused. Then said, just waking up. And feeling like I was in someone else's life. But it was his. And hers. 2 lives. 1 night. And a truth that can't be erased, no matter how much someone wishes they could forget. She was buried in a private service. Her family chose not to speak publicly. They said the courtroom had already taken enough from them. And somewhere in a prison cell, a man who used to crave the spotlight now spends most days in silence. With no cameras. No applause. And no one to rewrite the final scene. Would you believe him? Would you believe he didn't remember? Or does every choice leave a mark? They told a different story. She hadn't fallen once. She hadn't stumbled. The marks on her forearms suggested restraint. The ones on her back, repeated impact. There was a pattern to them. Even if the person responsible claimed to remember nothing at all. Forensics measured the depth of each contusion. Timed them. Layered them against blood evidence found on the walls, the carpet fibers, the bedsheet. And none of it lined up with his timeline. He said he called 911 as soon as he found her. But the phone records showed a gap. 10 minutes. Unaccounted for. When asked why, he simply said, I panicked. But 10 minutes is a long time in a 900 square foot apartment. Too long to just be panicking. Too long to not remember anything at all. And then, there was the final message. She'd sent a text earlier that evening to a friend, before leaving the club. Going back with that guy from the show. He's wild. Hope I make it out alive, lol. It was supposed to be a joke. Her friend replied with a laughing emoji. She never saw it. Investigators didn't use the message in court. It was circumstantial. But they remembered it. They said it haunted them. In the end, it wasn't just the bruises. Or the silence. Or the way the curtains were drawn so tightly no light had entered the room. It was the accumulation. The inconsistencies. The moments he couldn't explain, because maybe he didn't want to. He wasn't convicted because of a memory lost. He was convicted because the version of the night he offered had too many holes. Too many gaps. And the evidence filled in the rest. The verdict came with no reaction. No outburst. Just a long stare. Like he was still trying to process how the cameras that once loved him, had now recorded everything he wished could be erased. A woman's life ended. A man's lies unfolded. And all that remained was a room, still quiet, still empty. But echoing with what couldn't be taken back. Would memory loss excuse your worst actions? Or is forgetting just another way of hiding the truth? He said he blacked out. That the night collapsed into fragments. That the world around him disappeared and returned with the sound of sirens. But the bruises told a different story. Not random. Not accidental. They followed a pattern, each one suggesting action, decision, and force. The paramedics arrived too late to revive her. Time of death placed nearly half an hour before the call was made. And in that missing stretch, nothing he said could explain away the silence. There were other questions that never found answers. Like why a neighbor reported hearing the television on full volume at 2:43 a.m. Or why his blood work revealed trace elements of a stimulant he had once been prescribed, but hadn't reported using in years. He told investigators it must have been a mistake. That someone else must have brought it. But no one else entered that room. Not before. Not after. In court, his legal team worked to reconstruct a version of the night that felt distant. Blurry. They spoke about disassociation. State of mind. Loss of control. They leaned into the idea that whatever happened was unintentional. The result of confusion, not malice. But the forensic sequence dismantled that claim, piece by piece. Photos. Medical diagrams. Testimonies. All pointing to the same conclusion. This wasn't a moment. It was a series of choices. A progression. The jury deliberated less than 8 hours. Guilty. Second-degree murder. There was no statement. No apology. No acknowledgement of what had been taken. He looked straight ahead as the sentence was read. And in that still courtroom, the only sound was the shuffle of paper and the faint hum of the air vents overhead. She was laid to rest 5 days later. Her family asked for privacy. No press. No coverage. Just a quiet gathering in a small chapel outside the city. One of her cousins told a reporter later, off record, she always saw the best in people. Even when they didn't deserve it. Now, the man she trusted spends his days in a state prison hundreds of miles from the strip where his face once graced billboards. Where his name meant something. Now, it's a case file. An inmate number. A headline fading from memory. But the question remains. Do you believe he truly didn't remember what happened? Or was that just the last role he ever tried to play? The next story is different. There are no memory gaps. No blackout. Only belief. A belief so unshakable, it ended in the deaths of 2 children. Let's move now, to a case where the killer claimed not just to forget, but to have been told by something beyond this world, to kill. Story 2. She stood in the courtroom, calm, collected, hands folded neatly in front of her. And then, in a voice as steady as any preacher, she said it out loud. Jesus had spoken to her. He told her she would be freed. That this was all part of a test. There were no tears. No remorse. Only the declaration of a promise she believed had come from beyond the veil. A vision. A prophecy. A guarantee of redemption. But her children were still gone. 2 lives, Tylee and JJ, reduced to the silence of photographs and gravestones. And while their mother spoke of heavenly messages, detectives were left sorting through charred earth, encrypted texts, and a trail of lies that stretched across multiple states. Lori Vallow wasn't always known for faith. Not like this. There were years where she lived what many would consider an ordinary life. Mother of 3. Smiling in family portraits. Vacation snapshots on beaches. Birthday cakes. school pickup lines. Then came Chad Daybell, an author of apocalyptic fiction. A man with strong convictions about the end of the world, and who would be chosen to survive it. To some, he was a spiritual guide. To others, a manipulator cloaked in biblical rhetoric. Together, Lori and Chad created a language only they understood. They spoke of light and dark ratings, scales that assigned spiritual value to the people around them. They believed in portals. Possession. They wrote of missions. Of callings. Of separating the chosen from the condemned. Family members started noticing changes. Lori became distant. Withdrawn. Fixated. She said her children had been taken over by dark forces. That their spirits were no longer their own. She smiled when she said it. As if she'd made peace with it long ago. And then, they vanished. JJ, the youngest, with bright eyes and a diagnosis of autism, was last seen at school. Tylee, a teenager with a sharp wit and protective instinct, hadn't been spotted in days. Lori offered no explanation. She simply told those who asked that they were safe. That they were fine. But when investigators knocked on her door in Rexburg, Idaho, she didn't invite them in. She packed her bags. She and Chad flew to Hawaii. Sunlight. Lays. Wedding photos taken just weeks after Tylee and JJ were reported missing. The bodies were found in Chad's backyard. Months later. Wrapped. Buried. Concealed in a place where no one was supposed to look. Court documents revealed more. Text messages between Lori and Chad about zombies. Instructions. Timelines. They had classified JJ and Tylee as spiritually compromised. That was the word they used. Compromised. The defense tried to argue mental illness. That Lori had been led astray. That her sense of reality had fractured under pressure. But in her own words, she didn't express confusion. She spoke of fulfillment. Of prophecy. Of preparation for a future where her children's deaths were not a tragedy, but a necessity. She said she believed they were happy now. That their souls had moved on. That she had done what was required. The court didn't accept it. The jury listened. They read every message. Heard every recorded call. Saw every image from that backyard. And they delivered their verdict. Guilty. Multiple counts. The sentence, life behind bars. But still, Lori claimed otherwise. That this was temporary. That she had been told she would walk free. Not by her attorneys. Not by Chad. By God Himself. No appeals have changed the outcome. No visions have altered the facts. The children are still gone. And the world Lori said was ending, continues without her. Was it madness? Manipulation? Or unwavering faith in a belief only she could understand? Throughout the proceedings, Lori remained composed. Not distracted. Not disoriented. She sat upright, expression blank, often watching the testimony as if it were someone else's story being told. No flicker of grief. No acknowledgement of what had been lost. And when she finally addressed the court, her voice didn't waver. "I am not guilty," she said. "Because I am a servant of the Lord." The room didn't react right away. Even the judge paused. There was no legal defense in her words, just conviction. Not the kind used in law. But one that came from somewhere deeper in her mind. Unshakable. Unreachable. Witnesses had waited for this trial for years. Friends. Former family members. Teachers. Police officers who had walked through the dirt behind Chad Daybell's house and found what no parent should ever have to imagine. They expected her to break down. To regret. But she didn't. While the state presented the sequence of events with chilling precision, she watched, almost serene. As if none of it belonged to her. As if the decisions, the messages, the absence of her own children, had happened in another life. Tylee was last seen on a family trip to Yellowstone. Photos show her smiling, one arm around her little brother. What happened after that is stitched together through digital footprints and short, cold text messages. She never returned home. Her phone was used after her death, most likely to send replies on her behalf. There was no formal goodbye. No moment where she asked for help. No recorded call to anyone she trusted. JJ was next. 7 years old. Diagnosed with autism. Known for wearing his favorite red pajamas and carrying a blue backpack that was always a little too heavy for his frame. The last time he was seen alive was on doorbell footage from a neighbor's house. He was being led inside. Nothing seemed unusual, until he was never seen again. His grandparents tried to reach him for weeks. Text messages. Voicemails. All unanswered. Eventually, the authorities issued a welfare check. Lori told them JJ was staying with a friend. That he was fine. But she couldn't produce an address. Or a phone number. Or even a last name. That was when everything began to unravel. And when they finally found him, he was buried not far from Tylee. He was wrapped tightly. Bound. Still wearing the same red pajamas. Prosecutors described the scene carefully. No dramatic language. Just facts. Enough to silence the entire courtroom. Lori didn't look away. She never offered an explanation. Never uttered their names in apology. She insisted they were alive in a better place. That their mission had been fulfilled. That their physical absence didn't mean they were gone. But no one else in the room seemed to believe her. JJ loved cartoons. Tylee wanted to be a photographer. He was supposed to start 3rd grade that fall. She had just turned 17. There's no way to know what their final thoughts were. No way to understand what they felt in those last moments. But their memory is now held by those who tried to save them. Those who still speak their names. Who show up to hearings. Who light candles every September. Lori Vallow is serving multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. She still says she's at peace. She still claims she'll be freed. That justice on earth is temporary, and irrelevant. But for the families left behind, justice isn't abstract. It's the only thing left to hold on to. As the sentencing hearing came to a close, family members of the victims were given the chance to speak. One by one, they stood. Some brought photos. Others read statements they'd practiced a dozen times but could barely finish. A grandfather's voice broke halfway through his letter. He asked the court to remember JJ as more than a case file. He remembered the sound of his laughter. How he would line up his toy cars in perfect rows. How he called his grandmother every morning just to say hello. He spoke of birthdays that would never come. Of silence where a child's voice used to be. Lori sat still. She didn't look at him. She didn't look at the photos. Her hands rested neatly in her lap, and her eyes remained focused ahead. Unblinking. Detached. When her moment came to speak, she stood slowly. No papers. No prepared notes. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't offer remorse. Instead, she smiled gently and began to speak. She said she had received confirmation. That her children were safe. That they were happy. That she had seen them. Not in person. Not in dreams. But through a connection she believed was real. They visit me, she said. In spirit. They're nearby. They've told me they're not angry. They understand. The courtroom didn't move. Not a cough. Not a shuffle. Just the sound of her voice echoing through the silence. I know I will be free, she said. Not just someday. Soon. Because I've been told. Because the Lord never lies. No one interrupted her. Not the judge. Not the attorneys. Not even the grieving families seated just a few feet away. When she sat down, her expression hadn't changed. The judge read the sentence minutes later. Multiple life terms. No chance of parole. No chance of walking out through the same doors she entered. Still, she nodded once. As if the outcome didn't matter. She never addressed the evidence. Never denied the discoveries. She never spoke the names of her children. Which leaves only one question. Was it belief that blinded her? Or calculation masked by conviction? Do you think Lori truly believed in her visions? Or was it all part of her plan? But Lori wasn't done talking. What she said next silenced the courtroom. And left even her attorneys frozen in place. Next, we turn to a case far from religious prophecy. But just as baffling. 3 men. 3 fans of the same football team. All found in one backyard. And for weeks, no one could agree on how, or why, they died. Story 3. It was a Sunday like any other in Kansas City. A playoff game was on. Temperatures hovered below freezing, but in the neighborhoods near Arrowhead Stadium, homes glowed with tailgate energy. Grills fired. Fans gathered. Laughter carried through the air like smoke off the coals. Jordan Willis's home wasn't out of place. He had invited a few friends over to watch the game. Jason, Ricky, and TJ, all close. They shared memories, inside jokes, decades of history. They arrived with snacks, drinks, and jerseys. What happened that night should have ended with empty beer bottles and photos posted online. Instead, it ended in silence. 2 days later, 3 bodies were found in the backyard. Not sprawled across the lawn. Not inside a car. But tucked behind a privacy fence. Lying side by side in the frozen grass. Still wearing the clothes they'd worn to watch the game. Coats unzipped. Phones in pockets. Shoes soaked from the frost. The host, Jordan, claimed he hadn't seen them leave. That he thought they'd called a rideshare or walked home together. He said he'd gone to bed after the game. That he'd slept in. That he didn't look outside for 2 days. It didn't make sense. Neighbors remembered seeing the men arrive. They remembered laughter. Voices drifting through open windows. But no one remembered them leaving. When authorities arrived, there were no fresh tracks in the snow. No broken glass. No sign anyone had tried to force their way back into the house. They were simply there, still, cold, unmoving. The medical examiner ran tests. Autopsies. Toxicology screens. The preliminary results. Alcohol. THC. Some antihistamines. But no lethal substances. No external injuries. Just 3 men, found in the yard of a close friend's home, with no obvious cause of death. And a host who insisted he knew nothing. The questions began immediately. Why didn't anyone look for them sooner? Why did no one answer their phones? How does someone fall asleep while their guests freeze to death outside their door? And why were all the blinds drawn for days? Detectives combed through phone records. Text logs. Surveillance footage from nearby houses. They tried to piece together a timeline that didn't want to be found. The last known messages were routine. Game's on. You bring the wings. On my way. Nothing strange. Nothing angry. No distress. Inside the house, there was leftover food on the counter. Open bottles. Plates still sitting out. But no sign of chaos. No mess to suggest something had gone wrong. Jordan stayed inside for questioning. He gave a statement. He signed his name. Then, he hired a lawyer. From the outside, it looked like an accident. But when the families arrived, when they saw the backyard for themselves, they knew something wasn't right. One mother said her son would have knocked on every window. That he hated the cold. That he always wore 2 pairs of socks. Another said her brother was a lightweight, 2 beers in and he'd be asleep on the couch, not wandering out into the snow. And still, the official reports gave them little. Exposure to cold. High blood alcohol content. Low visibility. No clear explanation. Some suggested maybe they'd wandered out during the night. Maybe they'd laid down to rest. Maybe they'd gotten lost on the property. But why would 3 grown men, who knew the layout, who'd been there many times before, suddenly lie down in the yard and never get up? And why didn't the host ever go outside? Why didn't he notice their cars were still parked out front? Why didn't he call to check in? For days, news crews lined the street. Reporters stood in front of the fence. Neighbors whispered. Speculation exploded online. But the truth stayed quiet. Frozen. Just like the bodies in that backyard. What made them stay out there? What made them go quiet all at once? The official cause of death was ruled accidental. The families were left with more questions than answers. And Jordan? He moved away. No charges. No foul play, the police said. Just 3 lives ended in the most bewildering way possible. The toxicology reports arrived quietly, delivered in brown folders, stamped, dated, and signed. Alcohol was present in all 3. THC levels varied. There were traces of over-the-counter medications, too, something for allergies, something else that could make you drowsy. Individually, none of it raised alarms. Together, though, something didn't line up. The doses were inconsistent. Too high for the time of night they were last seen moving. Too low to explain total unconsciousness. One of them had a higher concentration than the others, far higher. Yet he'd been the last to arrive that evening. And according to the text he sent minutes before kickoff, he hadn't even had a drink yet. Investigators began looking closer. They rechecked timestamps. Cross-referenced messages. Compared witness statements with the actual condition of the bodies. That's when the stories began to drift. The host, Jordan, insisted he hadn't heard a sound. Said he fell asleep on the couch with the television on. That he assumed everyone else had left when the game ended. But a neighbor, 2 doors down, recalled something else. She said she heard knocking. Soft at first, then louder. Someone calling a name, just after midnight. She didn't recognize the voice. She didn't think much of it at the time. Another neighbor, one who lived behind the house, claimed their dog barked for nearly 10 minutes straight. That it only happened when someone was on the other side of the fence. The theory of accidental death started to fracture. A forensic pathologist reviewing the case raised questions, too. The way the bodies were positioned didn't make sense. The fact that all 3 were found so close together, without signs of disorientation or separation, seemed unusual. Typically, hypothermia doesn't hit all at once. Victims stagger. They crawl, they huddle, they attempt to escape. But here, it was as if they'd all sat down, and simply never got up. Family members pushed for a second opinion. They demanded an outside review. They hired private experts. One of them even returned to the scene with a drone, capturing thermal imaging to understand how cold it actually got that night in the yard. The results were chilling, but not impossible. It had been cold. But not that cold. More questions emerged. Was there something else they had ingested? Was there something in the drinks? Had someone locked the back door? One of the men had a partially composed text on his phone, never sent. It read, "Are you okay?" But there was no recipient. No timestamp. Just an unfinished message in the drafts folder. Jordan's silence only made things worse. After giving his initial statement, he stopped speaking to press. Stopped responding to families. Stopped posting on social media. Eventually, he moved out of the home. It went up for sale a few months later. Inside, everything had been cleaned, walls painted, furniture gone, blinds drawn tight. But memories remained. Unexplained ones. "Do you believe this was just a tragic accident?" one mother asked during a local interview. "Because I don't. I know my son. I know how careful he was. He wouldn't have gone outside without telling someone." Another brother said he believed someone panicked that night. That something went wrong and nobody wanted to admit it. That fear, not malice, kept the truth hidden. Still, no charges were filed. The official report listed environmental exposure as the primary cause. But behind closed doors, the families still meet. Still talk. Still ask the same question. Why? Why would three friends, familiar with the house, surrounded by people they trusted, end up dead in the cold? And if it was an accident? Why has no one been able to explain how it happened? Do you think someone is hiding something? Because the host claimed he didn't hear anything. But the neighbors said otherwise. The next story begins inside an elite college dorm room, where a quiet student from an old money family received a message that would later read like a warning. Just 1 hour before he was stabbed. Story 4. It was just past 8 p.m. on a crisp October night. The leaves on the Princeton campus had turned gold and copper, whispering against the stone pathways as students moved between libraries and dorms. For most, it was midterm season, a time of pressure, sleepless nights, and last-minute coffee runs. But for one student, it would be the last evening he'd ever see. Liam Cartwright was considered untouchable. Third-year student. Legacy admit. Varsity crew. A polished, magnetic presence, the kind of person professors remembered, even after a crowded lecture hall. He came from a lineage of board members and benefactors. Old money. Prestige. Reputation. His friends called him the mayor, because wherever Liam went, people followed. But on that night, something shifted. At 8:07 p.m., Liam received a text message. 7 words. Plain. Without punctuation. From his older brother, Thomas. It said, "Don't go anywhere until we talk." What happened in the next 60 minutes has become the subject of family dispute, police investigation, and endless online speculation. He was seen leaving Holder Hall shortly after receiving the message. He didn't respond. He didn't call back. He didn't stop to speak to the friends waiting for him in the study lounge. He walked briskly toward an off-campus house where a few members of his inner circle were known to gather. The path he took was dimly lit, lined with brick and framed by hedges. There were no cameras. No eyewitnesses. At 9:04 p.m., a 911 call was placed by a jogger who found a man lying near the edge of a footbridge that connected the campus to the neighboring residential block. But questions remain. Why did Thomas send that message? What did he know, and when? And why hasn't anyone come forward? You can still walk the path Liam took that night. Students do it all the time, passing the same hedges, the same bridge, the same lamplight that glinted off his coat in his final moments. And sometimes, when the wind carries just right, the leaves don't rustle. They hush. As if still waiting for an answer that may never come. He read it once. Then again. You need to get out now. No punctuation. No name. No context. Just those 7 words, pulsing across his screen like a warning siren with no sound. Sent at 8:24 p.m. He was standing outside the stone gates of Terrace Club at the time, one hand still wrapped around a paper cup of lukewarm coffee. His friends were just inside, music thumping behind the arched windows, laughter spilling into the walkway. From the outside, it looked like any other night. But Liam's expression didn't match the atmosphere. He didn't reply. He didn't move. Instead, he stared at the message, his thumb hovering just above the screen, before locking the phone and slipping it into his coat pocket. That decision changed everything. We know what happens next. He doesn't. He lingers outside for a moment, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Maybe he's considering the message. Maybe he's brushing it off. Maybe he thinks he has more time. The air is crisp. He pulls his collar higher, checks his watch. 8:27. A friend comes out to grab him. They talk. Briefly. He doesn't mention the text. He tells her he'll be right in. But he never goes inside. Instead, he walks in the opposite direction, toward the path that skirts the edge of the faculty housing row. There are no cameras along that stretch. Just old iron lamp posts, spaced too far apart, casting long, broken shadows across the sidewalk. Somewhere in the background, bells from the chapel ring out half past the hour. He pauses at the end of the path, near the edge of the wooded shortcut that leads to Alexander Street. And then, he takes it. The shortcut is overgrown in places. A little used. Most students avoid it after dark. But Liam walks it without hesitation, as if he's been there many times before. His phone buzzes again at 8:36. He doesn't check it. He keeps walking. 2 joggers pass him going the other direction. They describe him later as focused and alone. One of them says she remembers something strange, he was whispering to himself, over and over. She couldn't make out the words. Only the rhythm. Like a mantra. Or a countdown. At 8:41, the security camera from a faculty garage captures a blurry image of Liam crossing the footbridge. His shoulders are stiff. His hands are clenched inside his coat. He doesn't look back. That's the last known visual before he's found 23 minutes later. The text, "You need to get out now," was not sent from his brother's number. It came from an encrypted messaging app, registered to a prepaid burner line. The same kind of line found in Liam's locked drawer. But this one was never recovered. And that raises the question. Who sent the warning? How did they know what was coming? And why didn't Liam listen? Those who knew him insist he wasn't the kind of person to ignore danger. He was cautious. Methodical. He liked control. But on that night, for reasons unknown, he made a choice, to walk straight into the silence. Maybe he thought it was a bluff. Maybe he didn't want to be seen running. Or maybe he didn't believe the threat applied to him. That's the cruelty of hindsight. We see the road. We see the sign. We see him keep walking. And he never had the chance to read that final message, received at 8:46 p.m., moments before the attack. It simply said, "It's already too late." Just days before his death, Liam posted a photo from the steps of Nassau Hall. In it, he's looking off to the side, half smiling, dressed in a charcoal coat. The caption reads, "Spring comes slow, but it comes." His friends liked it by the hundreds. He was that kind of student, the one professors remembered by name, the one who always raised his hand a second before anyone else, the one people asked to look over their essays before turning them in. Someone once called him annoyingly brilliant, but only half-jokingly. His roommate said Liam had been more distracted than usual in the week leading up to the attack. He stayed up late, often with headphones in, sometimes just staring at his screen with a blank expression. When asked, he brushed it off. He had news to celebrate. He'd been accepted into a summer program overseas, an exclusive research initiative based in Vienna. He was supposed to fly out in June. The paperwork had just been finalized the day before he was killed. He hadn't told his parents yet. He was waiting, he said, to do it over dinner that weekend. Instead, they got a phone call in the middle of the night. A detective. A single sentence. "Your son has been found." At the memorial, they placed his acceptance letter at the front of the chapel beside his photo. There were tulips from his dorm mates. A worn notebook from his philosophy class. His favorite pen. One of his closest friends spoke. Her voice shook halfway through her sentence. He always made me feel safer. And now, I don't know who we're supposed to be afraid of. There were questions. Too many. Why was he alone that night? Why didn't he answer the second message? What had he been working on during those late-night hours? That last question, what was on his phone, lingered longest. It was locked with biometrics. His parents didn't have access. Police had to get a court order to break in. It took nearly 3 weeks. And when they finally did, when the screen lit up and the folders loaded, what they found inside changed everything. There were messages. Drafts. A video he'd never sent. A voice recording that stopped at exactly 38 seconds. A name detectives hadn't heard before. And a file labeled simply, "In case." It wasn't what anyone expected. And it wasn't meant to be discovered. But it was too late to ask him what it all meant. And too dangerous to ignore. Story 5. The phone call came just before midnight. Her voice was uneven, trembling, fractured between breaths. She said she was scared. Said she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to. Said her boyfriend had snapped. Within the hour, officers were at the apartment. The door was open. She sat on the floor, barefoot, her hands wrapped tightly around a glass of water that hadn't been touched. There was a single photograph torn in half on the table. The other half, missing. She pointed to the wall. Said that was where he'd hit her. Then to the drawer. Said that was where he kept the knife. And when they asked why she hadn't reported him before, she hesitated, just a beat too long, then whispered. Because I loved him. They arrested him that night. He didn't fight. Didn't argue. Didn't say much at all. Neighbors were surprised. Said they'd heard arguing before, but nothing like this. Said she was the loud one. Said he mostly kept to himself. In the official report, she described everything in detail, the way he'd gotten jealous, the way he'd changed, how he confessed to her one night after too much to drink. But she never mentioned the second phone she kept hidden under the floorboard. Or the message she sent an hour before the police arrived. It's done. What no one realized, not yet, was that just days earlier, another woman had gone missing across town. Her name was Celia Harper. 32. Graphic designer. Last seen leaving a late client meeting. Never made it home. And 3 weeks later, while the boyfriend sat behind bars, another woman vanished. Same pattern. Same location. Same time of night. A city on edge. A killer still out there. The first real break came when detectives traced security camera footage from a gas station near the second crime scene. It showed a woman in a dark hoodie, driving a car that didn't belong to her. It was the car of the missing woman. The plates had been removed. They enhanced the footage. Tracked the tag on her sweatshirt. It led to an online order made from the same apartment that had once held the framed boyfriend. The warrant came quickly after that. Inside her closet, beneath stacks of folded sweaters, were 3 phones, each tied to a different alias. And a notebook. Meticulously written. Names. Dates. One page marked Plan A. Another, Plan B. There was no mention of remorse. And when asked why she did it, why she accused someone she once claimed to love, her only answer was, because I could. He had spent 7 months locked away. He missed his mother's funeral. Lost his job. His apartment. He hadn't even known there'd been more victims. When they finally cleared his name, he didn't cry. Just asked for his jacket. And walked out of the precinct without a word. But that wasn't the end. Because when they re-examined the first scene, the one she'd staged, something was missing. Something that had been in the original photos. Something the officers hadn't noticed before. And when they found it, it raised a question no one wanted to ask. Had she acted alone? Or had someone else helped her disappear into the background? She said it once. That's all it took. A single sentence, carefully crafted, spoken without a tremble, lodged itself in the minds of investigators like a splinter. He told me he wanted to hurt someone. From that moment on, the case had direction. They had motive. They had a face. What they didn't have, was the truth. Files were stacked, photos pinned, timelines assembled. But each piece was distorted, just enough to lead them off course. Because they weren't building a case on evidence. They were building it on her version. And her version left no room for doubt. He became the villain in every retelling. Every witness was steered. Every inconsistency explained away by her tears or her trembling voice. While across the city, the real threat walked among the crowd. No connection. No clear pattern. Each victim lived a different life. Different routines. Different neighborhoods. But they all had one thing in common: they vanished without a sound. And still, the officers stayed focused on the man behind bars. Because her words were louder than their instincts. Louder than the silence the evidence screamed with. The worst part? The real killer had seen the news. Had watched the press conferences. He knew someone else was taking the fall. And that gave him time. In those months, 2 more families stopped answering phones. Missed birthdays. Held back tears when mail piled up on doorsteps. One mother told the news crew she knew her daughter would call, because she always called. She never did. And when investigators finally caught up with the truth, when the footage was found, when her mask fell away, it was too late for the women who followed. They had believed the wrong person. They had locked away a man based on a well-told tale. They had treated her like a witness, while she erased time for others. And still, he never spoke to her again. Never asked why. Never asked what else she'd done. Because some questions don't deserve answers. But the real question, the one investigators whispered behind closed doors, was this. If she lied about him, what else had she kept buried? And how many more names were missing from that notebook? The moment came without warning. A late-night stop at a gas station. A quiet glance at a license plate. A match, routine for the system, but anything but ordinary for the officer watching the screen. The man behind the wheel didn't flinch. Didn't run. Didn't fight. He just asked if he could finish pumping his gas. Inside the interrogation room, he sat with an eerie calm. Said he didn't remember all the details. But the details remembered him. Fingerprints. Traces left behind in forgotten places. A bracelet tucked beneath floorboards. A receipt for gasoline, timed exactly to the minute one woman disappeared. And when the questions started to close in, when the photos were laid out in front of him, he nodded. That was it. No grand confession. No breakdown. Just acknowledgement. The truth unraveled fast after that. Phone pings. Traffic cams. DNA results left no room for debate. The real killer had been hiding in plain sight, free to act, free to watch, as another man sat behind bars for crimes he never committed. And her? The woman who had pointed the finger and vanished from headlines? She reappeared. This time, not as a grieving witness. Not as a voice for justice. But as a key to a false narrative, one that cost lives. Prosecutors were left with a decision. Was her lie just obstruction? Or was it something more? Because while she never wielded a weapon, her words carried the weight of consequence. Her story created blind spots. And in those blind spots, people died. The man she accused was released quietly, no cameras. He didn't want them. He wanted time. Years lost to someone else's agenda. When asked if he forgave her, he said nothing. But the public asked louder questions. Did she act out of fear? Out of revenge? Out of boredom? And more importantly, should she face charges for what she caused, or for what she allowed? Because sometimes, the most dangerous person in a case isn't the one holding the knife. It's the one holding the story. Story 6. It was just after sunrise when the call came in. A woman, gaunt, bruised, chain around her waist, stumbling down a road near the woods, barefoot and disoriented. She said she'd been taken. Held for weeks. Beaten. Starved. Left to die. The story spread like wildfire. Photos of Sherry Papini filled news broadcasts. A mother of 2, gone for 22 days, now returned, shattered but alive. Authorities launched a full-scale investigation. Sketches were released. Descriptions given: 2 women, Spanish-speaking, branded her shoulder, kept her locked away. The town leaned in. Sympathy poured in. Fundraisers. Billboards. National headlines. But something wasn't aligning. The wounds were too calculated. The timeline, disjointed. DNA on her clothing didn't match the story. It matched someone else entirely. An ex-boyfriend. A quiet man in another state. No history of violence. No connection to the crime she described. When questioned, he didn't argue. He opened his phone. Handed over texts. Showed how she reached out. How she asked him to help her get away. She had stayed with him. Voluntarily. Cut her own hair. Branded herself. Then returned, ready to play the part. And no one had questioned it. Until the science did. Why? Why stage something so elaborate? Why risk everything? She claimed it was about her marriage. Stress. Feeling overwhelmed. She wanted to disappear, to feel wanted. But what about the resources used? The fear she planted? The faces of 2 fictional women broadcast across the country. And then, almost forgotten, came another twist. Not in her case. But in another. The story of the happy face killer. A long-haul trucker with a chilling signature. Confessing to murders by sending anonymous letters, each marked with a smiley face. His first victim went unsolved for months. Because a woman falsely accused her boyfriend. Swore he'd done it. Testified against him. He was convicted. And while the real killer kept moving, she was hailed as brave. By the time the letters began to arrive, it was too late. More were dead. The overlap was uncanny. 2 women. 2 lies. 2 very different motives. But the same result. Innocent people blamed. Guilty men given time to roam. Truth buried beneath false narratives. And for what? Attention. Control. Escape. Each case left victims, not just those in graves, but families misled, investigators derailed, and communities shaken. Because in both stories, the danger didn't come in the night. It didn't break down doors or hide in shadows. It spoke clearly. Looked people in the eye. Told them something terrible had happened. And watched them believe it. Do you think a lie should carry the same weight as the crime it covers? And when justice arrives too late, is it justice at all? As the rain continues outside your window, you're left with these questions. No easy answers. Just quiet echoes of what people are capable of. When truth is no longer enough. The lab results didn't lie. After weeks of theories, searches, manhunts, it came down to a swab. A single trace of male DNA found on Sherry Papini's clothing. It didn't belong to her husband. It didn't belong to any stranger she described in her statement. The hit came from someone else entirely, someone she once knew. He lived hundreds of miles away. Hadn't been part of her life in years. No criminal record. No connection to Redding, California. Yet when detectives showed up at his door, he didn't act surprised. He didn't hide. Instead, he invited them in. Sat down at the kitchen table. Told them everything. She had contacted him out of the blue, he said. Claimed she was trapped in a loveless life. Said she needed to disappear, just for a while. And she had a plan. He didn't ask many questions. He just drove. For 3 weeks, she stayed hidden in his home, eating, resting, texting her husband from burner phones. While the rest of the country was panicking, she was watching the coverage from a couch, just a few feet from her ex. Then, one morning, she said it was time. She cut her own hair. Marked her shoulder with a hot tool. Tightened a chain around her waist. And stepped out the door, ready to become the woman the world would pity. The officers took it all in. It sounded impossible. And yet, it explained everything. Why her injuries were oddly placed. Why her description of her captors kept shifting. Why nothing, absolutely nothing, ever felt quite right. Still, the public reeled. Why would someone invent a trauma so elaborate? Why create 2 fictional kidnappers, then vanish into the woods? As investigators pieced it together, someone brought up a file. An old case. Different state. Different decade. But strangely, familiar. The year was 1990. A woman was found dead near a highway in Oregon. She had been strangled, left in the elements. The case quickly captured attention, and when a woman came forward, claiming she knew who did it, the pieces seemed to fall into place. She pointed to her boyfriend. Said he'd confessed in a moment of rage. She gave dates, details, even helped reconstruct the crime. And the jury believed her. He was sentenced. She was congratulated. The public moved on. But the letters started arriving. Long, handwritten notes sent to local news stations. The author described details that weren't public. Crime scene specifics. A signature. Drawn at the bottom of each page, a smiling face. The real killer. A long-haul truck driver. Quiet. Calculated. He had watched someone else take the fall, and used the time to kill again. And again. And again. Authorities eventually caught him. He confessed to 8 murders. Possibly more. And the woman who made the false accusation? Never charged. 2 lives derailed. Multiple families destroyed. All because one person fabricated a story, and the world believed it. It wasn't about masks or monsters. It was about manipulation. A dangerous illusion presented as fact. And the consequences rippled far beyond the lie itself. So when Sherry Papini stood in court and admitted what she had done, the staged abduction, the self-inflicted wounds, the deception, the question wasn't just why she did it. It was how many others, just like her, had once told a story. And walked away, leaving truth behind them. How many more lives are written by lies no one ever thought to question? And how often do we mistake performance for pain? The answers may still be out there. Or maybe, we've already heard them. We just didn't recognize the voice. In the end, it wasn't just about one woman's lie. It was about everyone who paid the price for it. The officers who worked around the clock, chasing shadows. The husband who stood by her, believing she was tortured, only to learn she was never taken. The children left in the care of others while their mother orchestrated a fantasy. The community that prayed, donated, searched. All for a woman who had already been found, just in a place no one thought to look. And beyond that, there were victims whose names we never learned. The women the happy-face killer claimed after his first false conviction. Lives that may have been saved. If only someone had looked a little harder. asked one more question, doubted one more detail. Because that's the danger with stories. Sometimes they're told so convincingly, we forget to ask if they're true. Papini was sentenced. She cried in court. She apologized, to the judge, to the FBI, to her husband. But apologies can't rewrite what's already been lost. Time. Resources. Trust. She took something from the people who believed her. Something you can't measure in headlines or jail time. It's the slow erosion of faith, in victims, in justice, in truth itself. And in a world where real pain is too often ignored. Where real victims are told they're overreacting, imagining, making it up. A lie like Sherry's doesn't just hurt those closest to her. It echoes. And it makes it that much harder for the next voice to be heard. So ask yourself. How many more killers got away because someone lied? How many faces are still missing from the news, because we were chasing the wrong lead? And if you were on that jury, would you have believed her? The rain continues. The stories end here. But the questions. Tonight, you've walked through silent hallways where secrets clung to the walls. You've stood in courtrooms where truth twisted beneath a single word. You've listened to the voices of the lost, the betrayed, and the forgotten. And now, as the rain carries on beyond your window, take a breath. Let the stillness settle. Because what we explored tonight wasn't just crime. It was the weight of deception. The power of belief. And the cracks that form when we trust the wrong story. One man claimed he couldn't remember. Another said he didn't hear a sound. A woman insisted she'd been taken. Another pointed her finger, and steered police in the wrong direction. But the dead don't lie. And the details, they never forget. Thank you for staying with me, for listening all the way through this journey into the deepest corners of motive and memory. Which story stayed with you? Was it the mother who heard voices from heaven, or the friends frozen in plain sight? Was it the text that came too late, or the lie that gave a killer more time? Tell me what unsettled you the most, right down there in the comments. And if you haven't already, hit that like button. Subscribe, so you never miss the stories others are too afraid to tell. And if you're still awake, there's another mystery waiting for you, just over there. Click now, and we'll keep going. Until then, I'll let the rain speak for me.